that closed down. Between 70,000 and 100,000 people participated in the demonstrations. That does not include those who collectively decided not to work, shop, or attend school, and it was massive. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, the CWA's national presidents publicly declared their members were standing up coast to coast in solidarity, and they used Minnesota's general strike as a rallying point for broader opposition to ICE tactics. So this has been monumental.
Monumental. Simon, you're closer to. So, boss. By the way, I should have. Your background is awesome. And you should tell it to everybody. You wrote a great article yesterday about general strikes. You're the head of the Fighting Oligarchy Coalition, which is kind of a Bernie Sanders kind of related. You came from the Bernie world, but you started this in Wisconsin. It's kind of the resistance movement coalition in Wisconsin. You came from labor. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, and then tell us, what was happening from kind of the labor perspective in Minnesota to get that strike off the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Dirk, and nice to be on with you. I come from Madison, born and raised here. Grew up part of the teachers union strikes back in 2011, and found myself in the middle of the labor movement again when I was a professional baseball player. Helped organize a minor league baseball players association, and then continued with labor. So I worked for SEIU. I've worked for the AFL-CIO. I'm here, on behalf of a lot of our labor brothers and sisters, but also really just as an angry Wisconsinite and as somebody who wants to see ICE out of our communities, that wants to see our neighbors protected, and wants to see, frankly, not a return to an America that we lost, but a rebuilt America, something that looks more like an America that works for working people, not just big corporations. And so I'm excited to talk today. This is one of the most exciting moments, or in one of the most horrifying times, one of the most exciting moments of labor solidarity we've seen in generations in the United States.
All right, Simon, what did labor do? Who was involved in the strikes, in the strike in Minnesota that has caught on fire, and that's the reason we're talking about it today?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, as Patty mentioned, a big coalitional effort. But I will say that part of the reason that this galvanized so quickly and organized so effectively was because of the role that unions played, particularly local unions, that took a lead in calling for a general day of action, a shutdown. It was an economic blackout for the city. And so it was called different things in different corners, and that was intentional, in part, as we'll talk later, because of strike laws in the United States. But unions like SEIU Local 26, Unite Here Local 17, the Amalgamated Transport Workers Union, who often do their bus drivers in communities, they are as well in Milwaukee, and we'll get to that later. Teachers unions in Minneapolis and St. Paul, IATSE, which is the stage employees, theater employees, graduate workers at the University of Minnesota, the United Electrical Workers, the transit union. So we mentioned that earlier, but they shut down the buses as well, and they actually provided free rides often to folks to go to these rallies. We had the Committee of Interns and Residents, which is medical students in Minnesota. And then a bunch of labor feds. So these are local labor councils that are basically unions of unions at a local level in communities. And eventually the state, the Minnesota State Fed, the AFL-CIO, which is the umbrella body for many of the unions, most of the unions in Minnesota, also endorsed this, which has not happened since the 1934 general strike in Minneapolis. And we can talk about some of these historical examples later, but this is kind of a ground shaking moment for the American labor movement to stand behind an economic blackout like this.
Who else joined labor? Patty mentioned it a little bit, but we got faith groups. We had the Democratic Socialists. I got a couple things. So Amy did a lot of this research, and thank you, Amy. We got faith and peace groups, church networks like the Veterans for Peace and Jewish Voice for Peace, Faith in Minnesota, Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party, and other socialist organizations participated. So it was a huge coalition. Amy, ever since Trump was elected, and you're going to join for a little bit, and then you want to hop off because you'd love being in the background, but you did the research, and I really need your thoughts on this. We've been talking to Simon for a year, but even before that, before we met Simon, we were like, how do we, plug in with other people and get them to trust us, and work with them, and we've been talking about how to build networks like this. How did Minnesota pull this off? Because that feeds into a lot of our conversations from the last year.
So I think that like from the outside looking in, it looked a little decentralized, right? But in a sense, that was kind of the strategy. So there wasn't chaos. I think there was a lot of communications. And what we know from the history of Minneapolis is that they've engaged in this kind of work, not because they necessarily wanted to, but we had like what happened with George Floyd, right? And so they came together and they started organizing as communities. So we've got the labor movement, but we have a lot of smaller localized organizations that came together to figure out how they could help their community. So it was a large, it wasn't called by one group. Well, I guess there was the labor piece of it, right? But each sector really mobilized its own people. So I think that made a big difference. And Kurt, did you just mention that 700 businesses closed, or was that Patty? Because I think that's significant.
Yeah, Patty mentioned it, and it is significant. And we close in solidarity with them because we deliver lots of beer in Minneapolis, and that's huge. And it's because every single Wendy's, like we obviously a lot of us have relatives in Minneapolis. Like my brother-in-law said he couldn't go to a single Wendy's because every single worker was scared that they were going to be rounded up by ICE. And so it's like, it made sense for businesses to close because businesses are going out of business because their workers aren't showing up for work because they're too scared. Simon, before I want to make sure we get this out, you're an organizer. Amy came from the organizing world. Patty and I have big mouths, but we're organized. We're doing a lot of the organization stuff because we're showing up and doing stuff. How did they get the word out for this? How can you actually, because this is something we're gonna build on later in terms of how we do this again.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were flyers all over the city. They were stapled on like literally every telephone pole in many neighborhoods. There was also a lot of training that was done throughout this process. So there are like direct action and nonviolent direct action trainings happening all across the city and actually all across America. So please go join one in your local community. There's workplace organizing. Obviously, workers are doing this in their workplaces. When unions endorse, it spreads like wildfire because people spend most of their time at work. But I also want to note that these mutual aid networks that were built across the city, actually, I was in Minneapolis in 2020. I was doing some food deliveries from the Wisconsin side when many of the grocery stores were, the shelves were empty during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. And these same mutual aid networks existed then. And so I want to be clear that this doesn't happen overnight. But the mutual aid networks that have been built around the city are also organizing groups. They're community group chats, they're neighborhood signal groups where people can communicate information. And every single one of those, I guarantee you, was full of flyers and notices about this strike action. And I think this doesn't happen without sort of the community pulling together. And I think it's a no-brainer if you know folks in the Midwest to know that they will pull together in a moment like this. And that's kind of what makes our communities particularly resilient. But Minneapolis is just an amazing example of solidarity for the rest of the country to take note of. There's also, and I can point to a thread later, but like there was a person who posted a thread on Blue Sky that was like, the minute you walk into the city, you feel it. There's kind of a drumbeat of organizing happening in every corner of Minneapolis right now. And that's what we need in the rest of the country at this moment.
I think one of my favorite stories is this business called Smitten Kitten, which is an adult toy store that is one of the, they're kind of collecting a lot of supplies for people or helping organize too. So Smitten, fist up to Smitten Kitten. I love that.
Patty, I can't believe you brought them up because that's where the retired colonel, my retired colonel that just delivered $17,000 in a GoFundMe campaign of like PPE and feminine products for the shut-in immigrants. He delivered them to Smitten Kitten. Yeah. Some of that stuff because and I hesitated because it was like a porn shop and I was like, I can't show my Substack folks, tell them all to like go to a porn shop.
About sexual health. It's not.
Okay. Sorry. I apologize.
This is a story for another time. I'm just saying. You can't use your FSA for some of these items. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. So we just talked about everything that happened in Minneapolis, and Simon tells me that once you start striking, it is infectious and it spreads. And so in the next segment, after this commercial break, we're going to talk about the history of some general strikes to show everybody that yet they're not often, they don't happen often, but they are effective. And we can talk about some that have been very effective in the next segment. Stick with us.
We'll be right back with Kirk, Amy, and Simon on the Up North podcast. I'm your host,
Believe it or not, this podcast.
Roasters, our friends at Monaco Brewing Company, and of course, Pride Coffee Roasters. More in a moment on WCPT, KKNW, and KTNF. Hello, Minneapolis. We love you.
We didn't want to cut her off.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk and Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of the money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of Progressive Beer. The Monaco Brewing Company sells Progressive Beer all throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and online to about 30 states. Never seen it? That's likely because we've been banned by distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy Progressive Beer, go to MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click the Retail Locations tab. That's MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click Retail Locations. We get it. Your liver is under constant attack. Alcohol is a dictator that takes away your freedom. It distracts while doing its dirty work. It weakens your judicial system and governing bodies. If you give it too much power, you'll never be the same. We have the solution. 8647 THC Hop Water. Zero alcohol, zero calories, tastes like patriotism. 8647 THC Hop Water. Liberate your liver. Buy 8647 THC Hop Water and Joint Session, our THC Orange Cooler, by going to thc.monacobrewingcompany.com. That's thc.monacobrewingcompany.com. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Monaco Brewing Company, who sells Progressive Beer online across the country. If you like the show today, please consider buying one of our beer subscription packages for yourself or a loved one. You can subscribe to the Democrat, the Liberal, and the Progressive, which delivers four packs of beer to your door for 6 months, a year, or 2 years. To find where you can subscribe to get Progressive Beer delivered to your door every month, go to MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. That's MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. The Monaco Brewing Company is excited to partner with Brouhaha Coffee to create woke coffee. Get woke, go broke. That's what they say, right? Au contraire, mon frère. This gourmet coffee was awarded 2025 Roast of the Year at the Coffee Break Festival in Wisconsin, and it comes in both medium and dark roasts. Support our political action and enjoy fabulous coffee at the same time. For our Up North podcast listeners, go to the MonacoMarketplace.com, find coffee under the beverage tab, and type in Up North to get 10% off your order. That's MonacoMarketplace.com and use the promo code UpNorth.
Matter.
We are back with the Up North podcast here on WCPT, KKNW, and 1150. Joining us is Kirk Bangstad, who's going to take it away and lead us into our next segment.
Okay, so I probably should have set this up a little bit more in our first segment, but why are we talking about general strikes right now? Why are we talking about a national strike? So kind of if you game out what's happening in America, ICE is murdering people. They were disappearing immigrants before. Now they're murdering American citizens. There is you can hypothesize that, they're going to scare people so much because of the terror that they're wreaking on our blue cities that they're going to try to tampen down voting in November, or they might try to suspend voting, period. And so if you can't vote in a society, the only other thing you can do that's nonviolent to force regime change or to get rid of a dictatorship or authoritarianism is to just withhold your work and bring the economy to a screeching halt. So that's the reason we're talking about a strike, because we no longer have the power, we don't have any power in our three branches of government to change what's happening right now. So that's kind of the lead into this. Now, I wanted, Simon is the wizard at general strikes. And so I wanted, Simon, can you tell us a little bit about the history of general strikes, where they've worked in the past, both globally and in America?
Well, I am certainly not a wizard, because none of us have ever been a part of a general strike in America. And that's kind of for a reason. It's solidarity strikes have been outlawed in America since 1947. But across the world, and those of you who know me may know that I've spent a lot of time organizing outside the US as well. And a couple of places, one place that I've been to a number of times is Serbia. And Serbia had a general strike. It's had a bunch of general strikes in its history. But it had repeated general strikes in the late 1990s. But one particular strike In 2000 against Slobodan Milosevic, who was a dictator at that time, kind of hanging on to power in this really nationalist government. There's this Kosovo politics that kind of looks a lot like our southern border politics do in the United States. But at that point, there were these massive student movements, this group called Otpor, which is basically resist. And it's, they're massive student actions. There's protests in the street, and there's an election. And the election is not recognized by the National Election Commission, which is controlled by the Milosevic government. Sound familiar? It probably does to a lot of you. So the student movement that has been organizing this whole time, building up power, they're the reason these elections happened in the first place anyway. They called for a general strike. And the coal miners in the South that produced coal for most of the country did go on strike. They withheld coal from the country. And that strike, again, expanded. It exploded across the country. You had folks from all over the nation, in part because the central city, Belgrade, was actually not the hub of the strike. Their organizing had happened all across the country in the rural areas, in the sort of smaller communities. And they bust in, they drove their tractors in, they like rode wagons in, they took the train in. And by the end of that day, there were so to be clear, Serbia is the same size as Wisconsin, basically. There's about 1 million people in the streets in Belgrade. And at that time, the police actually stood down. They're like, we are not going to go arrest these protesters. They were at that point disobeying orders because they saw it was just ridiculous to control that crowd. And Milosevic resigned days later. Within a week, they had recognized the results of the election and appointed the new president. So that's one example that we can look to in history. Now, Serbia is not the United States, it's Wisconsin. So it's a much smaller example. A country that's much bigger, though, is Egypt. And those of you who were around Wisconsin in 2011, remember the solidarity between Madison and Cairo at the time, where there's protesters all over Tahrir Square in Cairo. And there's basically 300,000 workers that are participating in a general strike to oust President Hosni Mubarak. It started not as a general strike against the administration, but actually as a protest against police brutality that was so widely and deeply felt across the country that students and community leaders joined in. They had an occupation of the square. And then suddenly they call a general strike, workers walk out. But really importantly, workers who worked on the Suez Canal, the most important economic choke point in the country, struck. And that shut down the country's economy. And so they saw nearly $300 million a day in economic losses. And 2 weeks later, the president is ousted. In the US, we've had a number of general strikes at the city level throughout our history. And so Minneapolis is walking in a long line of tradition here. One of the examples that I'll use is Seattle. There's a 1919 Seattle strike. These are mostly in solidarity with other workers. So workers that go on strike then are joined by other workers, and it becomes a mass strike with mass demands. So Seattle's one example. I'll also use the example of Minneapolis. I mean, Minneapolis had a general strike in 1934 that was a strike by the Teamsters against the trucking companies in Minneapolis. They were joined across the city by workers who found, this strike struck home with them. They were joined by, workers across the city, by political parties across the city. At that time, there was a strong socialist movement in Minneapolis that joined them. And you saw a mass strike in that city too. So they have a history as well. There's strikes all over the world. You look in almost any country, you're going to find one.
Okay. So when I heard from you, the thing that came out to me was, if the Suez Canal is getting shut down and you're losing $300 million a day, there are rich people that are backing dictatorships, and they're generally aligned. So there's oligarchs and there's dictators. And as soon as it becomes more painful for an oligarch to support a regime because they're losing gazillions of dollars every day, then they choose democracy, or they choose to change regimes because they care about money more than they care about putting their thumb on people. So that's what I'm hearing, and that's exactly what we need to do here. Patty, talk to us about why it's hard to strike. There's a Taft-Hartley Act, and you talked to some union guys in Chicago. What are you hearing?
I am not as well versed on the labor history and movements around the world. However, during the early 1900s, we know that labor unions made incredible gains, and they were met with a lot of violence. During World War II, the unions were not striking because we were at war, but they also, at the end of the war, started to have strikes because workers deserved a piece of the massive amounts of profits that were made during the war. So there were Republicans who, of course, crafted legislation. They did get Democrats to support it as well. And so in 1947 was the Taft-Hartley legislation that bans whether it's wildcat strikes, any sort of sympathy strikes, general strikes. And when I talked to labor leaders here in Chicago, they said that that's basically, that employers can sue the employees if they go on strike. And we know since the 1980s, it's become even harder. We also have a drop since the 1940s in union membership. I mean, when we've been strongest, and that's part of what made us stronger during World War II, was having higher numbers of union members in power. So that puts us at a disadvantage when it comes to being able to strike. However, one of the things that we talked about was how much as we've mentioned before, the teachers unions have shown a light on how things can be accomplished. In Chicago, when teachers went on strike, I believe it was for 11 days, they weren't just fighting for their own pay or days off and things like that. They were talking about wraparound services and improving the lives of their students as well as the teachers, which I think is a way to show the path forward. Of course, no one's going to sue them. In Chicago, we have a mayor who is sympathetic to teachers, but it is an example of how things can be accomplished.
Simon, did we leave anything out about what some of the restrictions of the Taft-Hartley Act with general strikes?
No, but I'll just add, when you have an administration that looks like the Trump administration, it allows for some federal injunctions on strikes at times. And you can bet that the Trump administration is going to think about using federal tools to force workers back to work. You remember that, in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan did this with the PATCO workers and actually busted the entire union. And so that was a strike of workers. They were air traffic controllers. And Reagan came in and basically blew up the union from the inside. And this was one of the first sort of opening salvos of what became a 30, 40-year program of union busting by the federal government that has now culminated in the Trump administration appointing the worst labor board and labor administration we've maybe ever seen. The Biden administration certainly did not gain us back the ground we needed to be able to withstand this Trump administration.
Oh boy. It's a lot. Let's take a break here because we have to take a moment for our weather. We are continuing our conversation with the Up North podcast led by Amy Thomas, Kirk Bangstead, and our friend Simon Rosenbaum Larson. And we want to come back and pick up where we left off in a moment on WCPT, KKNW, and KTNF AM 950. We'll be right back.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of our progressive t-shirts. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells t-shirts to supplement our beer sales because we've been banned by beer distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy our t-shirts, go to MinocquaMarketplace.com and go to apparel. For Up North podcast listeners, get 10% off on all of our merch by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Marketplace, or what we like to call the Amazon for progressives. Every product sold on the Minocqua Marketplace is made by a company that's pledged to never donate money to the MAGA movement. There's over 60 companies on our marketplace, and we sell everything from nuts to detergents to doormats. Save democracy with your wallet by shopping only at MinocquaMarketplace.com. For Up North podcast listeners, save 10% on any order in the store by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. We get it. Your liver is under constant attack. Alcohol is a dictator that takes away your freedom. It distracts while doing its dirty work. It weakens your judicial system and governing bodies. If you give it too much power, you'll never be the same. We have the solution. 8647 THC Hop Water. Zero alcohol, 0 calories, tastes like patriotism. 8647 THC Hop Water. Liberate your liver. Buy 8647 THC Hop Water and Joint Session, our THC Orange Cooler, by going to thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. That's thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. The Minocqua Brewing Company is excited to partner with Brouhaha Coffee to create woke coffee. Get woke, go broke. That's what they say, right? Au contraire, mon frère. This gourmet coffee was awarded 2025 Roast of the Year at the Coffee Break Festival in Wisconsin, and it comes in both medium and dark roasts. Support our political action and enjoy fabulous coffee at the same time. For our Up North podcast listeners, go to the MinocquaMarketplace.com, Find coffee under the beverage tab and type in Up North to get 10% off your order. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com and use the promo code UpNorth. Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of our progressive t-shirts. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells t-shirts to supplement our beer sales because we've been banned by beer distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy our t-shirts, go to MinocquaMarketplace.com and go to apparel. For Up North podcast listeners, get 10% off on all of our merch by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth.
Are they back?
We are back, everyone. How you doing, Patty?
Good. How are you doing? Sorry about that.
So everybody listening live, Patty allows us to be on her airwaves in Chicago, and I appreciate that. We're live on Substack, Facebook, YouTube, and just recently Twitch, which I believe is for a younger generation that I don't even understand what Twitch is, but Simon's younger than me and told me we had to go on Twitch.
Simon, shouldn't we be playing video games while we're talking about politics? Isn't that the way to do it?
You got to do the little Subway Surfers on the side so that, all Gen Z is locked in.
I'm just saying.
Oh my God. You've definitely made me feel like a grandpa on this one, but we're hitting a younger crowd with Twitch apparently, but that's why sometimes when we come in from break, for everyone's doing their own ads and stuff. So we're just happy to get this out to as many people as possible.
And I'm shopping at kitten.com, by the way. So.
Okay. We talked about the history of general strikes. We talked about how Minneapolis, and Twin Cities pulled it off. Now I want to talk about, how we actually pull off a general strike in the United States. And Amy did a lot of the research here for us, but I know a couple of things have to be in place in order for a general strike to happen. And one, the demand has to be clear, broadly felt, and political. And I think, the demand wasn't clear until Eric Preddy was murdered. Was it Eric?
Alex.
I apologize. It wasn't clear until until we saw that video. We saw Renee Good's video 2 weeks earlier, and that horrified us. But it didn't become like a systemic, like this is going to keep happening unless we do something until we saw Alex that video. So it was an immediate demand. The demand is clear. We have to stop them from terrorizing us. So that's there. Now, the other pre-existing thing that has to happen is you have to have organizations already in place. And this has been building. We No Kings, Indivisible, unions, all these networks that we talked about, we've been building them for a year because of Trump's relentless attacks on our society. So, and then the third thing I'm not quite sure is there, but I think it's close. Elites, the oligarchs and the Trump administration, they have to be starting to divide or face a legitimacy crisis. And I believe the oligarchs are saying, we didn't sign up for this because the tariffs are happening, because our economy is also tanking at the same time that Trump is attacking, blue cities. So I think we're starting to see cracks there. And that is the time when the time is ripe for a general strike. So Simon, that being said, what does it take to actually the rubber hit the road for us to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a general strike is really hard and it's really risky. General strikes are, will cause repercussions for workers across the society. And I promise you, the oligarchs are not going to get on board. They're not on our team. Despite the fact that they may be breaking from the Trump administration, they want nothing more than to replace every job in America with an AI at this point. So we know for a fact that like the small business community is totally broken from the corporate, oligarch world. So the small business community, the workers, the organizations that represent the working class of America, that's the unions, but it's also faith groups and community organizations. They have to be able to develop this infrastructure to train and sort of support hundreds of thousands and millions of people going on strike, potentially losing their jobs, right? Mutual aid is going to become a massive part of every resistance movement as people, face retaliation for going on strike or walking out of their jobs. There are risks that, people have to face, whether it's violence from the state or from those in power. You saw the Pinkerton forces in the past called in by bosses. They were private security forces used to murder strikers in the past. Like, that's a possibility we have to be thinking about. Being able to align the labor movement, which is, the AFL-CIO has 12 million plus members, like that would be a general strike that could shut down America tomorrow if the AFL-CIO across all of its unions went on strike. But one of the things that I think I want to be clear about is we need to build that infrastructure today, and we need to do it now. And so one of the things we can do is begin building these sort of community networks that are going to form the basis of a strike. I like to call them strike committees. I come out of a union organizing background. We build organizing committees in the workplace. We're building strike committees in our communities. That's leaders from the labor space, so union leaders, union presidents, folks across the labor movement. It's faith communities, so it's your pastors, your ministers, your rabbis, your imams that are in the community ready to organize alongside you. It's community leaders. It's the head of the local indivisible group. It's, the person that knocks the most doors during a presidential election. These are community leaders as well. And it's going to require like a level of grassroots sort of overwhelming support to pull in. There's like a gravitational effect here where it pulls in community members and folks in the neighborhood, and they see signs and it becomes ubiquitous. And it's a moment, and we have to crystallize around a date and a time. And so I've been pushing people, and I think national groups have been pushing people to recognize that May Day, International Workers' Day, is our next moment to strike. And I think, many groups, including Voces de la Frontera in Wisconsin, have called for May Day to be a general strike day. And so that's what we're building towards here in Wisconsin. And I think groups across the country, whether it's the May Day Strong or the labor unions, are going to be moving for a general strike on May Day.
Okay, so you covered a lot of the infrastructure of all the different groups that have to form. What is the average Joe listening to this podcast? How do they start? How do they start getting active? Obviously we have all these structures. We have strike committees. We have strike schools. How do you get involved with that if you're not an organizer?
In your community, you have political organizing groups, whether it's an indivisible chapter, whether it's a chapter of the Democratic Socialists, something like that. Go to a meeting. That's the first thing you should do, is go to a meeting. Show up, be there with your community. Go find the folks in your neighborhood that have been politically active. Check who's posting on Facebook. Show up. Start talking to people. Meet a friend. Take a couple of friends with you. This is intended to be a social experience. So that's the first thing you should do. The second thing you should do is begin having conversations in your workplace. If you are a worker in a workplace, most likely you spend most of your time there with your colleagues and your coworkers. Just go have some feeler conversations. Don't go to somebody and say, hey, you ready to come strike with me? But, you can have those conversations about what's going on in the world, about how brutal it is to watch somebody get shot on your phone when you wake up in the morning by a masked agent walking in our streets. So that's the kind of conversation you want to start having with your coworkers. Look, we have months to build for May Day, but we should be starting to have these conversations now. And then once you have those conversations and you start getting a sense of the organizing space, figure out where the power centers are in your community. So here in Madison, we have a really powerful faith community. We have strong unions in the public sector in particular. Here in Madison, we have great teachers unions. That's a place we can start organizing. We can also start organizing with the really politically active folks in our community, the folks in the indivisible groups, the DSA, and groups like that. So that's what I would do if you are just trying to get started. Show up, start talking to folks.
What if I work at my house and I'm a contractor, and I work and I have Zoom meetings and I belong to a big corporation that's in another state, and if I don't show up on my Zoom meeting, they're going to fire me. How do I do that? Like, how do I participate?
Kirk, there's a bar on every corner in Wisconsin. Pop down to your local bar. Start chatting up folks in your neighborhood. Look, we are a community now, and the only way we're going to survive this is by building community where we are. So you own bars, Kirk. I'm probably within spitting distance of a bar. Go to your local bar. Go to your local.
But am I going to get fired? I mean, I'm the worker. I'm not Kirk, the brewery owner. I'm the worker. If I get fired because I don't show up because I'm part of a strike, what do I do?
Yeah, so this is the question that our movement has to ask itself is, are we prepared to handle what happens when people get fired? And right now we're not, right? And that's why we can't general strike. People have called for a general strike this week on Friday. If we mass walk out of work and 15% of people lose their jobs, they're going to be SOL trying to, pay for groceries, pay for rent, put a roof over their heads. We can't afford that as a movement, because it's going to demoralize people and it's going to hurt our movement as we move forward. So really what we have to be doing right now is build the community networks that can support that. And if everybody in your workplace walks out on the same day, you're going to be a lot safer. There's safety in numbers in this stuff. So that's why organizing matters.
Yeah. Wherever you work, and even it's remotely too. By the way, Kirk, I want to point out to Simon's point about go to your local bar. I live in a neighborhood that's fairly conservative. And so when I go and I watch Jeopardy or the evening news, generally there have been conversations, championing this regime's policies previously. They're much quieter now. Like when there's stories on it's a pretty significant shift. And I've heard them yelling amongst themselves. Things are moving. Even if it's just silence during news and stories about what ICE is doing, they're not celebrating, which was surprising.
Nobody in this country wants their freedom taken away. I think that's the baseline here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. The Second Amendment was just violated, and we all saw it. The gun nuts of this country, who are all Republicans, just saw a guy with a open carry permit get shot and murdered, and he didn't even draw his weapon. I mean, how can you honestly call yourself, a red-blooded Republican and see that happen?
Yeah. I do want to mention, we want to talk a little bit about mutual aid. For folks who want to know, like, you can Google mutual aid and see where there are locations in your area, how you can get involved. As Simon and Kirk have been talking about, this is going to be crucial to make sure that people have what they need in the event that they do lose their job, and do need to make sure that they're feeding their families, and how they can make connections there too. So for example, in the Chicagoland area, you can find like maps. There's just a whole bunch of sites that give you information about pop-up pantries, health services, all the kinds of things that you might need in the event that you want to make sure that you're supporting the people in your community who want to take part in the general strike.
Okay. So, Patty, I think...
go ahead. Because
we got to jump to a commercial.
That's
we got to jump
so fast. I got fast. Let's take a break here. We'll continue the Up North podcast led by our fearless leader, Kirk Banks, the owner of Minocqua Brewing Company, Simon Rosenbaum Larson, who you can check out all of his work on his Substack. And where else should folks find you? What are the best ways to connect with you, Simon?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Find me at your local bar talking about organizing a general strike.
Let's sip one back in my neighborhood, Simon. Let's take a break here, and we'll continue our conversation in just a moment on WCPT, KKNW, and KTNF. We're so glad that you're here.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of the money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of Progressive Beer. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells Progressive Beer all throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and online to about 30 states. Never seen it? That's likely because we've been banned by distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy Progressive Beer, go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click the Retail Locations tab. That's MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Retail Locations. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Marketplace, or what we like to call the Amazon for Progressives. Every product sold on the Minocqua Marketplace is made by a company that's pledged to never donate money to the MAGA movement. There's over 60 companies on our marketplace, and we sell everything from nuts to detergents to doormats. Save democracy with your wallet by shopping only at MinocquaMarketplace.com. For Up North podcast listeners, save 10% on any order in the store by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Brewing Company, who sells Progressive Beer online across the country. If you like the show today, please consider buying one of our beer subscription packages for yourself or a loved one. You can subscribe to the Democrat, the Liberal, and the Progressive. which delivers four packs of beer to your door for 6 months, a year, or 2 years. To find where you can subscribe to get Progressive Beer delivered to your door every month, go to MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. That's MonacoBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of our Progressive t-shirts. The Monaco Brewing Company sells t-shirts to supplement our beer sales because we've been banned by beer distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy our t-shirts, go to MonacoMarketplace.com and go to Apparel. For Up North podcast listeners, get 10% off on all of our merch by going to MonacoMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MonacoMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth.
The political commentator. Mouthpiece Scott Jennings out of the water. He's going to be at the Addison Township Democratic Organization hosting their 2026 legislative breakfast this Saturday, the 31st at the Itasca Country Club. Go to AddisonDemocrats.com. Let's go back to our podcast, the Up North podcast with Simon and Kirk. Take it away, Kirk.
Okay, so in the last segment, we were talking about mutual aid, and I wanted to keep on. We're going to talk about what's happening in Wisconsin, particularly, and what Patty's hearing about in Chicago as we end the show. But I want to continue with this subject. So, a lot of us aren't prepared to lose our jobs when we strike, but a lot of, if we are going to strike, a lot of us will lose our jobs. So who are the organizations like? I'm guessing nurses, the SEIU, the nursing union, or, they're going to have to potentially think about providing healthcare for people for free. Not food, rent, healthcare, the stuff that if we lose a job and we're willing to sacrifice it all and just kind of take a flying leap and not know if we're going to be able to afford stuff, who's got to start getting together and figuring out, how to help these people, help us. The people that are going to be without work.
Unions have experience doing this already on picket lines. I mean, unions go out on strike all the time. And so there's some level of experience doing this at a micro scale. And so I'll say, if you were in Madison during the SEIU nurses strike, you saw mutual aid networks developing, whether it was food donations or support. People were dropping stuff off at the picket lines, and there was community calls that went out. And that stuff just gets built up at scale. And so in many places, it starts with unions that have experienced doing it. But as you saw in Minneapolis, it's churches, right? Churches often do coat drives or, community bake sales to raise some money. That kind of thing just scales up during an event like this. And I remember during 2020 in the George Floyd protests, a lot of it just became like a local small business became a hub. They opened their doors and people dropped stuff off. And we've talked about that in Minneapolis. So, I think this is something that we know how to do already as communities. We do it all the time, but we often get compartmentalized into this universe of you got to buy everything. And suddenly when the rules get thrown off by the people in power, suddenly we return to our ability to be community people, community organization. We're community beings, I think, naturally. So, yes, it can start with unions, but I think it scales up fairly naturally during these kinds of things. And the coordinated planning happens at a very micro local level.
Got it. Okay. Still want to figure out how to pay rent when that happens. I get the food, I get the healthcare, strike funds, right? How do I pay my rent? Or how do I pay my mortgage if I strike?
Yeah, there's a mutual aid hub that Minneapolis organizers created that had GoFundMes for folks who are in need of rent money. That's been the way that it's happened in Minneapolis. Now, as we scale nationwide, obviously, we can't have folks from New York City donating to folks in Minneapolis because folks in New York City need a roof over their heads. I think you're going to see mayors in progressive cities, for example, taking some real action here. I think that's a point where we have to be organizing as a movement, not just as, folks outside the system. In California, that's one of the largest economies in the world. California could support the entire United States if they needed to in a moment of crisis like that. And so we're going to have to start having those conversations about, as we scale this thing, how I shouldn't say that this is going to happen, right? Like a general strike, if everybody walks out, the most likely outcome is that we win and that most people don't lose their jobs because everybody's out and all the businesses are closed anyway. If it's smaller than that, that's where the risk comes in.
Right.
Patty.
Yep.
What are you hearing? So let's move to right now, today. What's the feeling on the ground? I mean, you're talking to people every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people want a general strike, right? We hear that every day, whether it's my show or the other shows here on Progressive Talk. I think that a lot of people have the concerns that you're expressing, like how does that work? What would happen if I lost my job? I've talked to labor leaders who are a little bit more guarded with the information that they want to share right now, as far as the conversations that they're having and how that would unfold. I mean, that was where I learned a little bit more about how hard it would be with the restrictions under the Taft-Hartley Act. And I know that, in Chicago, there are a lot of organizations that are trying to ramp up. And I want to come back to the religious leaders, because it does seem as though there are more religious organizations that are stepping into the fray. I mean, we saw what was it, over 100 religious leaders who were being arrested while they were praying on their knees in Minneapolis. And I hope that with the resources a lot of these organizations have, that they bring that to their communities and let them know we're going to do the best we can to support you if you put your livelihood on the line. I think that we need to have really strong conversations with them. But at this point, we're not. Look, of my union, I'm not hearing a lot yet. My union is a SAG-AFTRA. I know that once we have bigger conversations with the other labor leaders in Chicago, but I know that there's a not just a hunger, but there's activity going on. They're trying to figure it out, but that's the most that was shared with me. And I would think that at some point we'll learn more. But that's the best I can do right now.
To give you a little insight into what's happening inside those rooms, I think, the unions in Minneapolis, part of the reason they called it an economic blackout was to avoid this sort of the potential for lawsuits and the potential for, and that's what we need to be doing, right? Like, we can't just be like, oh, it has to be called a general strike in every corner of America, right? Like, we got to build this thing with the folks who are in our corner. And frankly, unions are our most powerful engine for collective action in the economy. And so if we're not building with our unions, we're not going to have a general strike. Let me just be crystal clear about that.
Okay. So we want to make sure we get this out. You mentioned Voces de la Frontera, which is the group that's trying to protect immigrants, especially in Milwaukee, from ICE. You're talking with them. What are the next few things that are going to happen in Wisconsin, at least, or people are talking about that might lead to a structured test, which isn't a strike, but it's a organizing tool? What's coming down the pike in Wisconsin, Simon?
Yeah, so Voces de la Frontera is an immigrant rights organization that was developed, over many years and has been advocating in communities for decades. And so they have a really strong reputation here in Wisconsin. And they have called for a May Day of action many of the last few years, but this year is particularly, they want to escalate towards the general strike and to shut things down on May Day. Now, there's going to be a No Kings protest before that. And the next No Kings was called for March. I'm trying to pull up the exact date.
28.
March 28th.
You know why I know that? Because we sell No Kings t-shirts. And I was like, yes. Now, I don't try to profit off of this stuff, but we got to fund ourselves somehow. We got to fund the Substack somehow. And I sell a lot of merchandise. And so I like it when I hear No Kings protests are happening.
And by the way, if you like my t-shirt, you can pick up something similar from the MinocquaBrandCompany.com page. Just saying. I hate Illinois Nazis. Yes.
Nice.
I hate all Nazis, but specifically Illinois ones because they're closer.
Well, and we ripped that off because obviously that's from the Blues Brothers, and that took place in Chicago. Okay, Simon. So, what would a day of action look like? Would it look like what happened in Minneapolis on May Day?
I think it's going to be a lot more exciting than what happened in Minneapolis. And as exciting as Minneapolis was, I think a national day of action would look like an economic shutdown that affects the stock market. It affects the stability of the economy. It affects the US dollar internationally. It's meant to be a day of economic pain for the billionaires and the oligarchs that are causing this thing in the first place. And so I think what this would look like in communities is like a big No Kings protest, except that every business is closed. You're not going to the bar down the street after No Kings. You're not going to grab a hamburger afterwards because the businesses are shut down. It might look like everybody goes to a local park and has a picnic or something like that. It doesn't have to be so aggressive and militant and all this, but it is going to look like a day of shutdown. I think broadly what this is going to do is going to change people's mindset as to how they relate to a thing like No Kings. If No Kings in March is a structure test for us, what that means is we're going to have to count how many people participate and say, are you ready to take the next step with us? That's what we do in labor campaigns. Oftentimes we escalate tactics, whether it's somebody wears a button to work or wears a red shirt on Fridays. We count how many people show up. And if we don't have a majority, We go to the people who we need to bring in who did not participate in that day of action, and we pull them in for the next one. And so whether that's, a petition that everybody signs and delivers to the boss, we try to escalate. Each time has more participation, and it's a little riskier. It's a little higher temperature action until you build to the capacity to be able to strike. And so that's what we got to start doing now. I'm hopeful that the No King's Day in March is a good, structure test about halfway between now and May, but it's going to take more than that. It's going to take days of action in between, just like this Friday.
So a structure test to me, like I love it that 7 million people marched in the last No Kings, but we just can't have another one of those, right? We have to kick it up a notch. To me, kicking it up a notch is like, okay, you're marching, but at the end of that march, you're signing up your name to be in a ward, that's going to do the mutual aid. You're going to be the one that helps with the health care. You're going to be the one that helps with the food. You're going to be the one that helps with the apartment paying. Like, where are you signing up after you march to make sure that we got everything covered, for the next stronger thing that we got to do? I mean, we have to move it forward, right? And who's going to do that? Is that going to be Indivisible? Is that going to be Voces de la Frontera? Who's going to be taking the, writing people's names down?
This is why I've been yapping all along about strike committees. I think strike committees are what does this, right? We get strike cards that we get people signed up on over the next 4 months, and that's the network. That's the way we pull them in. It's coalitions of organizations, but it's building that strike committee in your community that is laser focused on a strike for May Day. And that's going to include pulling all the folks who show up to a No Kings protest in, getting them on strike cards, getting them educated, because frankly, I don't think most people understand why a general strike is so different than No Kings and why economic and non-cooperative collective action is what's going to get us out of this. But I think that's why we build local strike committees. And I cannot emphasize enough, go do that. If you're an organizer, go. Right now, those are your marching orders.
Amazing information. Again, that's Simon Rosenblum. Am I saying Rosenblum? Larson? And you can find him on all the social medias, on Twitter, on Twitch. Let's go to Twitch, everybody. Are we playing games together? That's what we should do next. Can we do like GoldenEye from like the 90s? I can do that on. Anyway.
I'll beat you all at Mario Kart. Just ask my girlfriend.
Outstanding. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kirk Banks. That's the Up There With podcast. Go to MonacoBrewingCompany.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Be a paid subscriber and support the work that we do. Love you all. Have a great night, everybody. Take care. Go to strike meetings.